Welcome, friends, to At Home with Theosophy. We are exploring in this series the fundamental teachings in the secret doctrine using a book, a compilation by Ianthe Hoskins that is called Foundations of Esoteric Philosophy.
So this is the second class in the series. Last week we went over the four basic ideas which HPB tells us that to keep those four basic ideas permanently in our mind. And as we go through the three fundamental propositions, we should keep in mind this urgency or this importance of these three fundamental propositions as we go through the secret doctrine. That's the idea of it. If we grasp these propositions, it'll give us a basis from which to study the entire secret doctrine.
Yeah.
And, I'm sorry, just want to make a quick note while I remember it. In some of the quotes, Blavatsky calls them principles. She'll call them the three fundamental principles. I'm sure this was the work of the Kiteleys. They probably changed it to propositions so it wouldn't get confused with the basic principles, the seven principles that we talk about in.
Yeah, so they were part of the group that helped HPB with the editing of the secret doctrine. But also HPB, this is something we have to learn whenever we study HPB, that she also that doesn't necessarily use the words in a systematic way, because her learning was not from books. We learn from books, and if the title says three fundamental propositions, we learn that title and we repeat it. But she learned all these teachings in meditation. So the source of her information is not a particular word or term or phrase that she can repeat every time. She has the essence of the idea and would express it in different ways.
Okay, here we go. In the Bowen Notes, Madame Blavatsky advises the student the first thing to do, even if it takes years, is to get some grasp of the three fundamental propositions given in the proem. The statement of these three principles is introduced with a similar insistence on their primary importance, and again, in concluding their presentation, Madame Blavatsky affirms that these are the foundation ideas of the Theosophical tradition.
So here we see that Blavatsky says even if it takes a few years, we should try to grasp the essence of these propositions. Because they are more than teachings, they are a way of looking at the world, a way of looking at life and the universe, ourselves, and that takes time to assimilate it. So let's see what these propositions are.
Ianthe Hoskins tells us it is absolutely necessary that we should be made acquainted with the few fundamental conceptions which underlie and pervade the entire system of thought to which their attention is invited. These basic ideas are few in number, but on their clear apprehension depends the understanding of all that follows. Therefore, no apology is required for asking the reader to make himself familiar with these first, before entering on the perusal of the work itself.
Mm-hmm. So that's basically what we were commenting. So let's see the first fundamental proposition.
The secret doctrine establishes an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range of reach of thought, in the words of the Mandukya Upanishad, unthinkable and unspeakable. Now, one of the things about the secret doctrine is we could memorize this as our minds are more conceptually in tune with memory. But if we, and as HPB asks us, are to use the secret doctrine as a form of yoga, then going beyond the words to, like Pablo said earlier, basically from where she got it to the essence of what they are, which is not some place we may get to, but at least the attempt of getting to the essence of the words is the practice of yoga from which we're working towards.
So if we see the first thing that the secret doctrine establishes is that there is an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle. So just meditating on these words is important. Omnipresent, this is as we are going to see, the ultimate reality, which is omnipresent, meaning the ultimate reality is behind everything. Many times in our Judeo-Christian tradition, we don't necessarily learn to think of the divine or reality in this way. We tend to think of the divine as separate from creation. But the secret doctrine is based on a different idea, the idea that the divine principle is omnipresent. It is within you. It is the essence of the chair you are sitting on. It is the essence of everything that is in nature around.
The word that I really like to explain this, it's one thing to say, omnipresence is everywhere and that I'm within it, but interpenetrating, that this principle is interpenetrating. So that makes me feel more like I'm within it. It's part of me.
So this in itself, trying to visualize how can the divine be interpenetrating everything, that in itself is part of what the secret doctrine is proposing us to do. Then eternal, in the sense of not bound by time. It never began. It's never going to end.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. There was no start. There is no ending. It's beyond time.
We could say probably today timeless. Because eternal sometimes has the connotation of lasting forever in time. But this is something that is actually beyond time, because as we are going to see in the Theosophical tradition, time is not eternal in the sense of, forever. There is a beginning and there is an end for time, which in science they agree with that. Time and space study with the Big Bang from the point of view of science. But then this principle is timeless, is beyond it. Then the other idea is that it's boundless. There is no end. There is no boundary. There are no limitations that separate this principle from something else.
Another way to look at boundless is that it is beyond the conception of our mind. It is just beyond, as which means too that there are no boundaries or there are no limitations. But the words that hit me was beyond the conception of the mind.
Yeah, if you think our minds always try to understand the world from the point of view of time and space, limited time, limited space. So when it is saying that it's eternal, it means it's not within time. When it is said that it's boundless, it is not within space, limited space. So this is part of the reason why Blavatsky says it is actually beyond what thinking can conceive. And then it is immutable, meaning that it never changes. It is perfect from the very beginning. It remains perfect whether there is a universe or not, and it will be perfect after the universe, appears or disappears. So, meditating on this, as we were saying, is an important aspect of the study of the secret doctrine.
This one absolute reality antecedes all manifested, conditioned being. It is the rootless root of all that was, is, or ever shall be. It is, of course, devoid of all attributes and is essentially without any relation to manifested finite being. It is beingness rather than being. So this is what we talked about, it being the essence of things.
Yeah, and the last sentence there, it is beingness rather than being. Normally we think of the divine as a being out there, which is different from our beings. which has its particular form, its particular activities. She says, well, the absolute reality is not a being. It's not a big being. It's not a spiritual being. It's not any limited entity. It is the beingness. It is that essence, that quality that is, as Michelle was saying, the essence of every being or entity in the cosmos.
Right. If we remember that things are composed of, or there can be an essence of something or a particular. The essence is that which without it isn't. And then the particular is maybe its color. So the example of a triangle. The essence of a triangle is three sides. The particular may be that it's an isosceles triangle, it's an equilateral triangle, it's a red triangle. So those are the particulars. The particulars is what our mind, our lower mind, conceptual mind, works very well at. It's the essence of things that we actually just need. It's a skill, per se, that we need practice at doing. And studying the secret doctrine or studying these principles or propositions is a way to exercise to improve our skill, to improve our...
Yeah, to conceive whatever is abstract. Because that is what this paragraph says. It is, of course, devoid of all attributes. What does it mean? Well, any attribute belongs to a particular example of something. Like Michelle was saying, a particular triangle will have these attributes. So this ultimate reality is like the essence of all triangles, and it's actually the essence of everything, but which doesn't have any particular attribute. Another problem with saying that the absolute reality has an attribute is that therefore it denies any other attributes. So for example, if we say, let's take as an example colors. If we would say the absolute reality is red, that means that the absolute reality is neither green nor blue. So green and blue would be outside the ultimate reality, which cannot be. So we cannot really say that the absolute reality is good. We mentioned a little about this when we were talking about unity last time. We cannot say that it's good because it denies, the opposite of good. Or we cannot say that it's this because it denies the opposite of that. So basically, again, we see that it's something that our minds cannot grasp. But it's important to realize that there is something that is beyond the conditioned things that we know about.
And one of the things that we can do to help work on this in our everyday life is to try to perceive things without naming them. So my initial response is to look at saying something and categorize it. It's pretty, it's ugly, oh, it's funny looking, it's red, it's green. But if I can walk around my daily life now and try to perceive things or look at things without naming them, then that's just a little practice to kind of switch my mind from its conceptual way of thinking to a more essential way of thinking.
Yeah. The mind that is cataloging is the mind that is fixing itself on the attributes of something. And that mind cannot conceive the idea of an essence.
Deborah, does that answer your question? How might this apply to a human or animal?
So, the idea of essence, you could say there is an essence that is shared by all animals. There is an essence that is shared by all humans, but then there is an essence that is shared by all sentient beings. And there is an essence that is shared by sentient and non-sentient beings. So the ultimate essence that is at the basis of everything, absolutely everything, is this absolute reality.
Right. So the essence of a rock is, I guess, in this way of putting it, would be its rockness. What makes it a rock, or what makes a plant a plant? Mm-hmm. So then those are pretty big things to be able to name.
Yeah.
This beingness is symbolized in the secret doctrine under two aspects. On the one hand, absolute abstract space, representing bare subjectivity, the one thing which no human mind can either exclude from any conception or conceive of by itself. Can we stop here? Because because this threw me with all these words, and then I figured out what she's talking about here is unconditional space. So what she means is, she says this way, she says subjectivity because it's not an object. It's not a thing. It's subjectivity as opposed to objectivity.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because we can perceive two objects, and then we talk about the space between those two objects. But in fact, we are not perceiving the space. We are perceiving the two objects. If you remove the two objects, then you don't see the space in between. So the idea is that, as Blavatsky says, space is something that we cannot exclude from any conception we can think of. For example, in mathematics, there is the idea that the point is without dimensions. It doesn't occupy any space. Well, try to think of a point in the mathematical sense, and you'll see that it's impossible. We may make it very small, but it's always something that occupies a certain space. So space is something that is very abstract, and she says is one of the foundations of, or one of the aspects of this absolute reality. And the second one,
on the other hand, absolute abstract motion representing unconditioned consciousness.
So we'll see, she's going to explain a little more about these two aspects of the absolute.
I think we have diagrams. Yep. Okay, so the diagram here just illustrates what she's talking about, and this could be called, I believe I read it, a metaphysical trinity. Mm-hmm. So it's beyond the physical trinity, but it's the beingness, which is the essence, and then it's two aspects, the absolute abstract motion, which is sometimes called the great breath, and absolute abstract space, which is the root substance.
Yes, what you see when you study this idea of space in theosophical literature is that space is not empty. We saw some of this in our previous class. Space is substantial in the sense that it's not something devoid of objects. It's something that is full of the essence from which objects may arise, which we related last week with on the physical plane with this quantum soup, as sometimes they call it, or these quantum possibilities from which particles come into being. So that's why the aspect of space is called by HPV the root of all substances in the universe. And then motion, we are going to see, she said, is unconditioned consciousness, because motion is necessary for consciousness, as we will see.
Thus, the first fundamental axiom of the secret doctrine is this metaphysical one absolute beingness, symbolized by finite intelligence as the theological trinity.
So, in many religions, we have the idea that the divine is threefold, the trinities in different religions. So she says though that the trinities are threefold is a symbolic way of talking about these three absolute aspects from which everything comes, and we will see this as we proceed with this fundamental proposition. As it says there, we use nouns to refer to all this. I think that's why Blavatsky, for example, we talk about motion. Well, if something moves, that means that there is something there that moves. And I think this is why she says absolute abstract motion. We are not talking quite about the motion as we know it on the physical plane. Same with space. Space may be, limited on the physical plane, as science proposes, but this is an absolute abstract space.
So this right here, we're still in the unity. Mm-hmm. So we haven't, there hasn't been a differentiation yet of anything. So that's why the absolute abstract motion, we have to keep that in mind, that this Trinity that we see here is still really a unity.
And an absolute unity, not even a manifested unity.
It may, however, assist the student if a few further explanations are given here. Considering this metaphysical triad as the root from which proceeds all manifestation, the great breath assumes the character of pre-cosmic ideation. It is the source and origin of force and of all individual consciousness, and supplies the guiding intelligence in the vast scheme of cosmic evolution.
So technically speaking, the first fundamental proposition finishes, with the previous slide, with the absolute reality and the three aspects. But then Blavatsky goes on to move away from the absolute reality itself and show a little how manifestation comes from here. So the first thing that she says is that aspect of the absolute that is the great breath, or the absolute abstract motion that we saw in the previous slide, becomes the pre-cosmic ideation, which is the source of intelligence. We'll see all this.
Okay, this just explains what we just said.
So you see there the pre-cosmic ideation coming out of the absolute abstract motion.
And it's still unmanifested, so...
Sometimes it's called the logos, because logos is the source of intelligence in the cosmos. So as you say, there is pre-cosmic, before the cosmos appears, and ideation in the sense of idea or intelligence, etc.
Okay, so here we follow it down from absolute abstract motion, pre-cosmic ideation, which then manifests into individual consciousness. When I thought of this, to help me keep the two sides distinct, what I thought was, in order for us to be conscious of anything, we need motion. I used to be an athletic trainer and work with athletes, and we would give them ice baths. So if they had a sore ankle, we would stick their ankle in the ice bath. And they would stick it in there, and it would be absolutely freezing at first. But then after a while, without any motion, it would warm up around the body. So we'd go in there and stir the water up so that it would be cold again. So that got me thinking about, without motion, we can't conceive of things. We can't, our consciousness just doesn't work.
Yeah, it happens when, if you leave a part of the body.
Right, that's what I'm saying. You give the example of, if I set my hand down and I don't move it, eventually I lose consciousness of my hand until I make motion. So.
Yeah. So philosophically speaking, consciousness needs motion to be conscious, to be aware, at least at the level of duality. And so all kinds of consciousnesses in the cosmos, the consciousness in human beings or in animals, or the consciousness in a bacteria, as we saw last week, everything is conscious. All consciousness in the cosmos are different manifestations of this pre-cosmic ideation that comes from the absolute abstract motion.
On the other hand, pre-cosmic root substance, Mula Prakriti, is the aspect of the absolute which underlies all the objective planes of nature. It is the substratum of matter in the various grades of its differentiation.
So let's go to the diagram.
Okay, so here we can see the right side of the diagram from absolute abstract space becomes pre-cosmic substance, or this Mula Prakriti, which Mula is root, Prakriti is substance. So this is the root substance from which matter, spoiler alert, from which matter will manifest.
Yeah, I can go to the next one and we see there.
Yeah.
So you see the space, as we were saying, is the source of matter or substance. And from this pre-cosmic substance, that is, to some extent is what we were talking about chaos. Chaos as this formless substance that gives rise to different kinds of matter. In the Theosophical view, there are different planes, 7 planes, and with different degrees or kinds of matter. All these come from the absolute abstract space. So we see here those two basic, this basic duality, consciousness and matter, and how they manifest from the absolute reality.
Spirit or consciousness and matter are to be regarded not as independent not as independent realities, but as the two facets or aspects of the absolute, which constitute the basis of conditioned being, whether subjective or objective.
So this is also important. In our conceptions, normally we think that spirit and matter are separate, are different. These are two separate creations in a sense. But the secret doctrine is based on the idea that both of them are two aspects of the same. This is why she mentions these as aspects of the absolute. They are not independent realities. They are two facets or aspects of one single reality. So they are not really separate.
And I always picture this, going back to my high school biology class, as mitosis, when a cell divides. It divides. It's one unitive entity, and it divides into two. And those two parts, or those two aspects, are still the same entity until they divide more and become more specialized.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could be very similar to the manifestation of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And then Claudine says, the Mula Prakriti refers to the pre-cosmic basis of matter. Yes, that's mm-hmm. what this is showing.
Yes, so as Michelle said, Mula means root, and Prakriti is substance. We can call it matter, but taking into account that there are different levels of Prakriti.
Right. And it's nice not to call it that, at least for my way of thinking, because if we look at, in the absolute, it's motion and space. And then it comes down to ideation and substance. And then when it manifests in the world, it becomes consciousness and matter. So that way I don't get confused, per se, at what level it is.
Yeah, and you see that in those words there is a progressive concretization, if we can use
right.
that word, from abstract motion into ideation into consciousness, from abstract space into substance into matter. So you see those words help us see how it becomes more and more concrete.
It will be apparent that the contrast of these two aspects of the absolute is essential to the existence of the manifested universe. Apart from cosmic substance, cosmic ideation could not manifest as individual consciousness, since it is only through a vehicle of matter that consciousness wells up as I am I. Again, apart from cosmic ideation, cosmic substance would remain an empty abstraction, and no emergence of consciousness could ensue. We see this use or this need of a vehicle in many aspects of taking the abstract or the spiritual or the unmanifested and bringing it down to something that's more manifested. We see it with our principles. Atman is not able to be perceived unless it acts through its vehicle of buddhi. Higher manas which is too spiritual to be perceived by the lower vehicles, can only be perceived if it has a vehicle or through the Antakarana, which is that bridge. So we see that this is just as above, so below thing, or as side by side, that we need, that this vehicle is needed in order for things to be experienced. I don't know if that's a good word.
Yes, because consciousness in abstract, without working through some kind of matter, is not really consciousness. And again, matter without a consciousness moving or vivifying that matter is not really matter. If we separate them, we go back to just being two aspects of the absolute. So the idea is that there is no consciousness that is not using or expressing itself through some kind of matter, and there is no matter that is not expressing some kind of consciousness. And what kind of consciousness will be expressed depends on what kind of matter you have as a vehicle. And when we go beyond this duality, we go to something that is beyond consciousness and matter, which we can call this absolute, state.
And then coming back down, to use the word, once we have a duality, we see that we came from a unity, we came from beyond unity, then we came to a unity, now we're in a duality, and from that duality there is a triplicity, and I hope that's the next slide. Nope, not yet.
Yes.
It is? Okay.
Yes.
In the manifested universe, that which links spirit to matter, subject to object, is called by the occultists Fohat. It is the bridge by which the ideas existing in the divine thought are impressed on the cosmic substance as the laws of nature. Fohat is thus the dynamic energy of cosmic ideation, or, regarded from the other side, it is the intelligent guiding power of all manifestation, the thought divine, transmitted and made manifest through the Dhyan Chohans, the architects of the visible world.
So there is a basic problem. We are talking about this duality between consciousness and matter, which, as we said, they are not separate realities to begin with. But in Western philosophy, for example, Descartes proposed that there are two aspects to a human being, mind and body. That mind was immaterial and the body was material. So the question comes, how can something that is immaterial affect something that is material? Something that this is sometimes called the ghost in the machine. How can something that has no matter interact with matter? So modern philosophy and science, they tend to reject the idea that consciousness is not material, because they say if it is not material, it cannot affect matter. And so when we think lifting our hands, we lift the hand. How if that consciousness is not material, how did it get to move the hand? It has to be something material. But Blavatsky says not so, because there is a bridge that links the so-called immaterial mind with the material body. And this link is Fohat, and we will see what that means. Let's see.
Sorry.
Well, we can stay there, because first she talks from the point of view of the divine. In the consciousness, no need, because
Okay.
we have there the cosmic ideation is the source of intelligence in the cosmos. And the cosmic substance is the material that the cosmos, or by which the cosmos generates all the forms. So she says that through Fohat, through this, sometimes she calls it cosmic electricity, it is through Fohat that the plan in the divine thought is impressed in the cosmic substance. So this is what she's going to say.
Thus from spirit or cosmic ideation comes our consciousness. From cosmic substance, the several vehicles in which that consciousness is individualized and attains self-consciousness. While Fohat, in its various manifestations, is the mysterious link between mind and matter, the animating principle electrifying every atom into life. Okay, so this is what I was kind of getting ahead of myself on. We have the cosmic ideation, which we see can go down, that eventually manifests into consciousness. The cosmic substance, also known as akasha, that manifests down into matter. And then the third of that trinity is the cosmic electricity, or fohat, which manifests into energy. And this bottom piece down here with the green arrow is meant to show consciousness tapping into the energy or being vivified by that energy, then can shape or make, not make matter. That's not.
Yeah, no, but organize matter into a form or move matter. You know, for example, Blavatsky says that one of the main manifestation of fohat on the physical plane is electromagnetism. This is why she sometimes calls fohat cosmic electricity. So applied to a human being, we have first a movement in consciousness, in mental consciousness, for example. And that the idea is that the movement of consciousness generates a certain electromagnetism that is transmitted to the physical body and generates the reactions that are needed for the body to function. You know, we know that movement in the body depends on electrochemical reactions that generate electricity and magnetism. So electromagnetism would be something that is concrete enough to affect matter and subtle enough to be affected by consciousness. Actually, science doesn't really know what electromagnetism is. It's even problematic to know what an electron is. An electron, you know, science is it should be, well, I don't want to go into details, but from a quantic point of view, the mass of the electron should be bigger. They cannot explain what an electron is. The electron doesn't seem to move through space, but jump. So electromagnetism
itself, it's not going by the principle of as above, so below. It's not following per se. It's not, the electron isn't following the rules that most matter or most substances that science can measure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because science is trying to understand the electron in terms of matter, but perhaps the electromagnetism is more, as Blavatsky is saying here, a form of energy rather than matter. Of course, matter and energy are two aspects of the same reality, and Theosophy adds something more. Matter, energy, and consciousness are interchangeable or depend on each other. But anyway, at the level of differentiation, we can see how consciousness generates the electromagnetism that acts on the cells of the body, and that's how consciousness and matter are linked.
I do have a lot more to say, but because I love this. I love the manifestation of the universe, but
we have to keep moving.
We have to keep moving. Sorry. Okay. So that was the first fundamental proposition, which basically is a unity, that there is this unity, and from that unity evolves or manifests or emanates our physical world. So the second fundamental proposition here in a nutshell would be the law of cycles. And so further, the secret doctrine affirms the eternity of the universe in toto as a boundless plane, periodically the playground of numberless universes incessantly manifesting and disappearing, called the sparks of eternity. The appearance and disappearance of worlds is like a regular tidal ebb of flux and reflux.
So here the first thing we see is that the secret doctrine affirms the eternity of the universe as a whole. You know, taking the universe as a whole, it is eternal, but as a boundless plane, as something that is, you know, infinite. However, periodically, there are numberless universes manifesting and disappearing. So the specific universes are not eternal. They begin and they end. But that takes place within a boundless plane that is eternal. So this is the first idea.
So we kind of think of the universe as everything that we know, but it's really not a universe. It could be called something more of a multiverse.
Yes. Let us take, the idea of universe, or what we call universe in the sense of all the stars and galaxies we know. Let us call that cosmos. And let us call universe the container of the cosmos. So there is a cosmos that appears and disappears, but the universe stays there. The universe as this container, whether there is a cosmos or not, the universe is eternal. Then another cosmos will appear and disappear. So maybe we can see it in that way. And the second idea here is that this appearance and disappearance of cosmos, worlds, stars, etc., is like a regular tidal web, she says. It's a cyclic appearance and disappearance.
The second assertion of the secret doctrine is the absolute universality of that law of periodicity, of flux and reflux, ebb and flow, which physical science has observed and recorded in all departments of nature. An alternation such as that of day and night, life and death, sleeping and waking, is a fact so perfectly universal and without exception that it is easy to comprehend that in it we see one of the absolutely fundamental laws of the universe. This law on a grand scale we can use to help us understand the secret doctrine. We can help us to understand the nature of the universe and the cosmos within the universe. But we can also it can also help us to understand ourselves. And even more than, okay, we all know we wake and go to sleep. We all know we live and die through the cycle of reincarnation. But on a regular, this lifetime microcosmic existence, I can look within that and I can see the cycles within myself, the cycles of emotions or my cycles of thinking or the cycles of moods. And I've learned that from that I can better figure out how to live day by day. I know my mornings aren't a good morning, so I'm not going to pack my morning full with stuff that I need full mental capacity with. And this is how, when I was reading this is how I applied it to me.
Yes. You see, so this is, as Blavatsky says, a fundamental proposition of the secret doctrine, that everything goes in cycles. History goes through cycles, and we will see a little about that later. Then the cosmos moves in cycles. As Michel said, even life and death goes in cycles, reincarnation. And then our daily life also moves in cycles. And we see that there are cycles of activity where we are very busy and cycles of rest where we seem not to be able to be active, for example, for whatever reason. And we normally tend to fight all the cycles. When it's a cycle of activity, we want to rest. When it is a cycle of resting, we want to be active. But understanding that, there are different periods, there are different situations, and we can try to work with the particular cycle at the moment. There are times that everything goes on wheels, and there are times that everything we have to struggle to accomplish the smallest of things. And this is part of the cycle. So it helps us, accommodate ourselves and know that things change.
And remembering that that's the nature of the mind. When I want to, be awake, I'm tired. When I'm tired, I'm awake. That's the very essence of the mind, the physical mind. So when I realize that, then I can also better understand, when I am tired and I'm awake, what's going on, and try to work with it. It's a dance. To me, it's a dance, and knowing all this stuff helps me to better move through the dance with without tripping.
Yeah. So it says this counters the mind's prejudice in believing in beginnings and endings.
Right.
And this is important, for example, in cosmology right now, there is this idea of the Big Bang, like everything started, with the Big Bang. But there are many problems with that because, it is said that it came from a singularity. How was this singularity generated? And then if we think that there is only one Big Bang, there are many difficulties with that theory. So they keep patching up the Big Bang theory so that the theory can accommodate itself to what we observe in the universe. So now many scientists, or a group of scientists, are proposing that the universe may be actually a cyclic universe. The problem is that how does science know what happened before time, or before the beginning of the time that we are living in? At the beginning of the Big Bang, time and space on the physical plane as we know it started. How do you know or measure or have any signal of a time that was before? So this is why it's difficult for science to accept the cyclic nature. But it's the same prejudice we have with reincarnation. How do I know that, after death it's not the end of everything if I don't remember previous reincarnations? Understanding that cycles is an essential part of nature is a beginning to start looking at things in a different way.
And then in our meditations and our daily lives, we can work on that dual nature of our mind, of our mental thinking, and realize, or at least have an idea, when I'm thinking from a lower nature or a concrete nature that cannot go beyond time. So instead of that higher mind, which is beyond time and space.
At least how we experience it. Then there is another...
Yeah, this Deborah says, this is how it seems to work within me, and I gather great understanding of the teachings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're on to the third fundamental proposition, which in a nutshell is about the evolution. We're talking about evolution of consciousness from an unself-consciousness, unself-consciousness to a self-consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Moreover, the secret doctrine teaches the fundamental unity of all souls with the universal oversoul, the latter being itself an aspect of the unknown root.
Okay, so let's see this first point, the fundamental identity of all souls with the universal soul. So we are now in the diversity that Michelle was mentioning, and we all have our soul, but fundamentally our souls are the same as the one soul, the oversoul, the universal soul, let's say. So the first thing that we have to look at, because you see in the previous fundamental proposition, Blavatsky is talking about the cosmos that appears and disappears, but she first says the eternity of the cosmos as a whole. As a unity, the cosmos is eternal. And then we have cycles appearing and disappearing. And here, again, Blavatsky will say, souls evolve. But let us start first by realizing that all these different souls are fundamentally the oversoul, the universal soul. So here we see what we were discussing last week, the going back to the unity constantly. Before we start looking at a specific process, position yourself in the unity first. And from there, look at the diversity. So that's the first idea here.
Right. So going from that oversoul, the unity, she says here, the obligatory pilgrimage of every soul. So now we've individualized the souls, which is a spark of the former, through the cycle of incarnation, or she calls it necessity, in accordance with cyclic and karmic law during the whole term.
So there are a few elements here. First, the idea of obligatory pilgrimage and the cycle of necessity. Part of one of the again, the fundamental axioms or propositions that the secret doctrine is based on is the idea that embodiment or the spirit or the soul wrapping itself up in matter is necessary. It's an obligatory pilgrimage. It's not an accident. It's not a mistake. It's something that the soul needs to go through in order to accomplish the evolutionary aim that we will see what that is.
So this obligatory pilgrimage is basically the soul's journey through the kingdoms of nature.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to go more into that. We have a few minutes. So
yeah.
So the kingdoms of nature consists of three elemental kingdoms first that are more forces than they are entities. Mm-hmm. From there, and that's kind of a force of the higher mind, a force of the lower mind, and a force of emotions. And then from there, manifestation is in the mineral kingdom. From the mineral, it's a plant. From the plant, it's an animal. From the animal, it's the human being. And from the human being, it's onto the Dhyani Chohans, or Dhyani Buddha. Mm-hmm. What's unique here is in the human kingdom is the only place where you have all the previous kingdoms, aspects of all the previous kingdoms, and aspects of the kingdom after it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked a little about that in the previous class with the microcosm, or human beings as being the microcosm. So the first points here in this proposition then is that the souls it's obligatory for the souls to incarnate, but that all these souls are aspects of the universal oversoul. And there is a question there.
What is the relationship between the many millions of souls and the one oversoul? This is like the sun being the universal oversoul and the millions of souls being the rays of the sun. You wouldn't say, we actually think of it separate, but it's not separate. It is the sun that is shining down upon us. And then I guess if we take, there's the example of the magnifying glass. You can take that ray and make it an actual beam.
Mm-hmm. So this universal soul is not really a separate entity. But it's rather the synthesis. This is a difficult concept in the secret doctrine, because just like in human beings, we said in our previous class that the consciousness of a human being is actually the sum total of the consciousnesses, of all the different consciousnesses that are in a human being. So many of our feelings or thoughts or how we feel, how we act, they depend on what is going on with ourselves. When we say we are tired, what do we mean by that? We mean that the cells run out of ATP, that it's the energy, the molecule that has the energy for the cells. So when I say I'm tired, I'm actually saying that this feeling is coming from the cells. The cells are tired, but what I call Pablo is a part of the consciousness of Pablo is the cells. And then we have the same with emotional elementals that Michelle was talking about, mental elementals. Many of our moods and activities come from them. And then we have the overall consciousness that we call Pablo, for example. It's the synthesis of all of them. It's the sum total of all these different consciousness. So in a sense, the only thing that exists is the universal soul. And this universal soul has different aspects, which are all our individual souls. So you see there is no real separation between the universal soul and the individual souls. It's more a hierarchical way of, are you looking at the individual cells or are you looking at the human being as a whole?
So the individual cells would be equated to the individual souls that we see. The organs, because you said in the hierarchy, so the cells come together to make an organ. The organ comes together to make, back to biology, organ systems. The systems come to make up, me or you individually. Now, those individual cells, as even though they're rays of the sun or souls from the universal oversoul, cannot live without being part of the larger organism. So that's what we mean here by the soul is part of the oversoul. It's not some separate thing that has its existence outside of it.
Yeah, and that's, again, a conception that we normally have in our religious upbringing. We think that the universal soul is an entity out there separate from us. And that's not what the secret doctrine is proposing. And this is why Blavatsky says, even if it takes years, we should work with the ideas in the fundamental propositions, because again, it's not so much a question of concepts. It's a question of changing the way we look at everything. And that takes years. We hear this many times and we read about this many times, and little by little we start changing the perspective. But I think, as we are saying, maybe a concrete example, and always remember that examples are limited, but it would be, it's just a question of where you are looking. If you are looking at the cells, then you are looking at the individual souls. If you are looking at the whole body, then you are looking at the universal soul. But it's the same. It's just different levels of the same.
And these are great seeds for meditation. And I think, for me, the best place to start would be with the body or with the sun, and really think about, each individual cell in relation to the body, or each individual ray of the sun in relation to the sun as a whole, and then move on to each individual soul in relation to the oversoul. And that way I'm going from a completely concrete thing, me, to something that's out there, the sun, that's still concrete, to something that's completely abstract. And that way I can kind of tease my mind into getting to abstract.
Yeah, that's a way to move from the known into the unknown.
So Deborah says, so could this mean that ultimately no human soul can ever fail or reach its eventual return to the source? Sorry, I don't have the source, enlightenment.
Yes. Again, we talk about enlightenment and all this when we are looking at the souls individually. The oversoul is beyond enlightenment or darkness or ignorance. But what we mean by enlightenment in this case is that when that universal soul is manifesting through matter in all different forms, the universal soul realizes its true nature as a universal soul through the different fragments that are expressing through matter.
So just as you said that the universe, from within the universe, the cosmoses are coming and going. The same thing within the universal soul, each individual soul is enlightened and not enlightened throughout its processes of incarnations.
Yeah. Right? So suppose, for example, let's use a psychological example. You love a person, but then you are upset and you forget that you love the person. I mean, you forget in the sense that you don't feel it at the time. And then you are not different from the person, from the other mood in which you know that you love the person, but at the time that you are upset, you don't feel that love. So enlightenment would be remembering, realizing again, overcoming that anger or upset, and feeling again the love that we have for that person. So you see, there are no it's not that there are two different people. It is just different moods. So you could think that the individual souls are the universal soul, but in a particular state where the universal soul forgets its original nature. And then it regains the memory or the realization of its original nature in each of the individual expressions of that soul.
Like when you have kids and they're so cute as babies, you can't stop hugging them enough. Then they turn to teenagers and you kind of want to forget about them. And then eventually they come back around.
Yeah.
Okay. In other words, no purely spiritual Buddhi, divine soul, can have an independent conscious existence before the spark which issued from the pure essence of the universal sixth principle or the oversoul has. Can we break this down first? So Buddhi, the divine soul, and the universal sixth principle are all the same thing.
Yeah, so the Buddhi is like the individual sixth principle, in the sevenfold nature, and the oversoul is the universal sixth principle. So the oversoul is like the cosmic Buddhi, and then we have our individual Buddhi. Now, what Blavatsky is saying here first is that our individual expression of Buddhi, the individual expression of the cosmic Buddhi in us, cannot be conscious unless the following happens. So that's basically what this is saying.
Okay. So because I said it wrong. So Buddhi and the divine soul are the same thing. The universal sixth principle and the oversoul is the same thing.
Yes, and they are both
levels.
Also essentially the same. Our individual divine soul is the expression of the universal soul in this particular individual.
Right, and so universal as opposed to individual sixth principle.
Yes.
Okay, so these...
So the individual soul cannot have a conscious existence
until it has passed through every elemental form of the phenomenal world of that Manvantara. And the Manvantara is an evolutionary cycle. And acquired individuality, first by natural impulse and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts, checked by its karma, thus ascending through all the degrees of intelligence, from the lowest to the highest manas, from mineral and plant up to the holiest archangel, the Dhyani Buddha.
So here Blavatsky describes the process by which the universal soul individualizes first into these individual souls, and then how it comes to an awareness of its true nature. So first...
So A is what we've been talking about, going through the kingdoms of nature. And then B is talking about, when I was reading through this and did some other study, and the self-induced and self-devised efforts. To me, that was, just to put it, and you can go on about the metaphysical aspects of this, but to me this was, I think if I do the right thing, if I work really hard, then I should get these rewards. This grace of God should come down and bathe me in this protective environment so that nothing bad happens to me. But that's not what this is about. This is about trekking this obligatory pilgrimage on my will and by myself without expecting any grace, anything to lift me up faster, to take my karma away, to do anything like that.
So there are three stages in the journey of the soul. The first one, that is what Blavatsky says, the acquisition of individuality, first by natural impulse. In the pre-human kingdoms of nature, little by little the soul is individualized in a natural way, without effort. without conscious efforts. There is an overall effort of nature, but it's not effort in the way that we understand it. Nature flows, rolls, its laws, and as a result of that, there is a natural growth into individuality.
It's an innate quality.
Yeah, from elementals up to animals, there is a progressive individualization of consciousness. Now, when we come to the human kingdom, is when we are expelled from paradise, where everything was spontaneously perfect. Now we have to make efforts to eat, to dress ourselves up, and to have children. It's difficult. So the human kingdom is the place where there is this thing that we call effort. Once we transcend the human kingdom in the celestial beings, there is again the spontaneity. There is again the effortlessness. So the human kingdom is the place in which this thing that is very mysterious, that we call free will or freedom of choice or effort, takes place. And as we move closer and closer to the next evolutionary stage, we move further and further away from effort and get closer to a more spontaneous response.
This can also be too where karma, the principle karma, fits in, because sometimes we always think
karma meaning the passions, the passional nature.
Sorry. Yes, this passional nature is it always gets like a bad rap. It's the animal nature, and we want to get rid of it. But this is where that passional nature helps us along with this this impulse or this moving along. It's what gets us off the couch, what gets us going.
Yes, the masters talk about the human nature sometimes as the orphan, because in the human stage we separate ourselves from nature. Of course, we cannot really separate ourselves, but psychologically we separate ourselves from nature. But that is necessary because it is in the human kingdom where the sense of I am myself appears. And that sense can only appear when I feel that I am disconnected from the rest. I am myself. I am not the whole any longer. I am not, just driven by the whole. I am myself. I decide by myself. This is like the teenager stage where, we go through the same psychologically in our teen years. We start developing our identity. And for that, we have to separate ourselves from the will of our parents or society. I have to assert my identity. So that is exactly the same that happens with the soul in the human stage. This is the time to say I am. And then as we proceed in the second part of the human pilgrimage, that I amness has to be softened, has to be expanded, so that it's not a divisive I amness. It's an awareness of I am the whole, not just this little part.
Suzanne says, in reference to A, we have to pass through every elemental form in every world cycle ruled by a special Manu, the Manvantara.
Yes, all these cycles are guided by intelligences. Of course, it's easy for us to think of them as human beings and anthropomorphize these intelligences, because this is the only kind of intelligence we know, the human one. But the idea is that every cycle is guided by a special kind of intelligence, which in Hinduism they call the Manu. Manuantara or Manvantara comes from Manu. It's like the cycle for that particular Manu. And we could say, for example, this again has to do with the cycles. There is a cycle in which the mind needs to be awakened. And that would be the Manu behind that cycle is a special kind of consciousness that stimulates the mind. There may be another cycle where the intuition has to be developed. So the Manu for that cycle is a kind of intelligence or cycle, energy, all this is different aspects of the same that stimulates intuition. So we can say that each cycle has its own Manu, its own logos, its own order, you know.
The pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit throughout a long series of metempsychosis and reincarnations. I always get ahead of myself.
Yeah, but yes, this is what we were talking about, that during the human kingdom, there is this question of, because the human kingdom is the stage of evolution of our minds, and the mind as a doer, as a thinker, as a source from which action comes, has to be purified so that the mind can be a vehicle for the spirit. So the purification of the mind is kind of in the hands of that mind, obviously influenced by the spiritual consciousness, but it is the mind that has to decide to go in a certain direction, to listen to the spiritual, and that is what we call personal effort. It's the mind working on itself, so that with the development and purification of the mind can become a more perfect vehicle for the spiritual. And that happens through metempsychosis. It's a similar meaning to reincarnation. Psychosis comes from psyche, you know, not in the medical sense, which obviously in the medical sense also comes from psyche. Psyche is the mind and emotions in us. And metem means like a change. So metempsychosis is like taking new minds. So it's reincarnation, but from the psychological point of view. And reincarnation is coming again into flesh. Carne, is the Latin for flesh. So we need to go through physical and psychological cycles of embodiment to accomplish this.
Now, isn't this word metempsychosis misunderstood sometimes as reincarnating with the same mind and emotions into a new body, or into the same body, I guess, too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. HPV, if we are going to use metempsychosis in the sense that HPV was using it in Isis Unveiled, for example, in her previous writings, by metempsychosis she basically meant the movement from one kingdom to the other, where the soul acquires one more principle, in the plant's sensitivity, in the animal emotion, in the human mind. So these are different metempsychoses. At least that's how she used it in the past. So, and reincarnation is within the human kingdom in particular.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, yes.
So that's the three fundamental propositions, and such are the basic conceptions on which the secret doctrine rests.
So you see that maybe perhaps a last point to mention is that this third fundamental proposition also implies that there is no possibility of creation in the way that we normally think of. A typical question from people is, well, why does, if the spirit is perfect, why didn't the spirit create a perfect form that doesn't obstruct its expression, and then we are saved of all this suffering? But in the secret doctrine, or according to the universe that the secret doctrine presents, creation is impossible. It's not possible to create a perfect form. And if it were possible, it would not work or produce the result that it needs to produce. So the only thing that is possible is gradual evolution. So the soul needs to awaken gradually in an ever-perfecting form. Blavatsky says, if you would put a perfect personality or body and perfect personal principles to a soul that is undeveloped, that soul would remain asleep, because the soul needs the contrast of the imperfection to wake up. So it would be useless to give a perfect personality to a soul that is asleep, because it would never wake up. So
It
basically,
needs the grossness that we've talked about that before. It needs the grossness, the harshness to
the
it.
impulse, the conflict, the change, the contrast, that is what wakes the soul up.
And that's what wakes us up. If things are nice, we usually are asleep. It's when things are not so nice.
So the third fundamental proposition implies this also, that there is no possibility of just creating something perfect. Perfection exists always on the absolute plane, but is attained or is regained on the planes of illusion only by gradual evolution.
So Claridine says that we must take our own progress in hand and evolve by self-induced and self-devised efforts. And then Deborah, did you want to make a comment?
Yes. Now remember that those efforts become subtler and subtler. At the very beginning, they are very separative efforts, in a sense, efforts that, that make you separate yourself from nature, from everything else. But as we grow spiritually, that effort becomes, far subtler. At some point, the effort is actually an effort about not making an effort. And eventually, the not making an effort becomes effortless. And then, the spiritual nature can flow through us. But that happens when, by means of effort, we have reshaped the vessel of the spirit so that the vessel of the spirit is perfect and perfect in quotation marks. Let's say the vessel of the spirit doesn't generate friction in the expression of the spirit. So we could say that effort and conflict and all that is when there is friction in the expression of the spirit. So as the personality becomes more and more in tune with the spirit, then it looks like there is less and less effort to act in the right way. So yes, effort is essential during the human stage of evolution, but then that effort gets subtler and subtler.
And Deborah says, so messing up is good. There's that saying, there's that saying that when you lose, don't lose the lesson. So that reminded me of that. Ed says, self-effort in the context of the world and fellow travelers.
Yeah, so again, it's how you look at things on different levels. So down here, it looks like effort, for example, and I think that's also what Ed is suggesting there. Here we are among all of us, and there is effort, and but that thing that is experienced as effort is also the expression of disorder, as we saw in the fundamental proposition. Blavatsky says checked by karma. Well, karma is this natural, spontaneous order which is behind every effort. So there is always a state in us. If we can raise our consciousness beyond the separation, beyond the diversity, there is no effort there. The effort, as I said, is the friction that happens on the lower planes when that natural order is trying to gently, although many times it doesn't feel gently, push the form so that the form can be molded to this natural higher order. So if we live down here, we will feel the friction. If we can raise our consciousness, we realize the natural order. And this is like in Light on the Path that says, listen to the song of life. And then it says, when you listen to life, you may say, I only hear discord and conflict. Well, look deeper within, and you will realize that all that is actually a song.
And that goes along, too, if you listen to the individual instruments playing. You don't hear the beautiful harmony of the music.
Of the whole.
Yeah, of the whole. So,
any other question or comment before we close? So you see, try to look during think about these points during the week
And in your meditations,
yeah, in your
because that's the same
meditation.
thing, you know, to go from a meditation that goes from the individual back to the whole in any aspect that you can think of.
Yeah.
Is a practice.
Yeah, and you'll see that it does, you know, when we really understand what these words mean, it does change the way we tend to see the world, divinity, ourselves, etc.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so
Well,
thank you everybody.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for your participation, and Mary, yeah, for helping out there. And we hope you have a nice week, and that we see you next Tuesday.
Next week is the five
proven facts.
thank you. 5 proven facts. We'll see you then.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.